So that's good.
Okay, so we are recording. All right, everyone. So thank you so much for coming today to another installment of the UQ Philosophy Seminar. And today we have the pleasure of having Fred D'Agostino, who is an emeritus professor here at UQ. And Fred is going to be speaking about a new theory of diversity, if I remember the title correctly. So please, Fred, the floor is all yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I'm very honored to be here today. And I'm really glad that Julian's here because I'm really going to be talking today about a theory in political philosophy that's very strongly associated with our friend Jerry Gauss, who died, 3 years ago now? And he was a great mate of Julian's and a great mate of mine. And so in a way, this is a way of honoring his memory. He briefly worked here in what was then called the Department of Government. And he also later briefly worked at the Queensland University of Technology. And so he has a kind of a Brisbane connection. And he is one of the main participants in what I like to call the new program in political philosophy. And I'll kind of explain all of that in a moment. But he called it the new diversity theory. And I think that's catching on, and it's a little less pompous than, my idea. So that's good. So new diversity theory, I'm going to read for a little bit and then I'm going to talk. But I realized that this thing that I'd written for some other occasion was actually a really good way of introducing the development of the idea. New diversity theory is one response, among others, to a crisis in that part of social and political theory that is concerned with normative thinking about legitimate social arrangements in what Richard Rorty called the North Atlantic democracies. And even though we're a South Pacific nation, we're part of that. The crisis arises from the unhappy conjunction of some seemingly sensible theoretical commitments, including especially these three ideas. First of all, that social arrangements are legitimate only when stakeholders have adequate reasons to endorse them. Secondly, that there is empirically a diversity of legitimacy relevant reasons that might bear on these matters. Crudely, different individuals have different legitimacy relevant reasons. And thirdly, that there are significant costs associated with imagining away or idealizing or normalizing this diversity of reasons. So those are the three ideas that are in some considerable tension. The first idea is crudely what sits underneath the idea of public reason or public justification. It's received a lot of development over the last 30 or so years. The second has recently and increasingly formed the background to cutting-edge thinking about the legitimacy of social arrangements, and of course has a provenance at least as far back in a recognizable form as Isaiah Berlin's writings in the 1950s. And together with the third, which has both ethical and practical aspects, it constitutes, in effect, the doctrine of pluralism, or the view that at least some diversity has to be taken seriously by theorists, since it would be disrespectful of stakeholders not to do that, and because if we ignore diversity, we will, whether wittingly or otherwise, be driven to utopian idealization rather than practically relevant thinking about our situation. Taking together these three ideas are now increasingly understood to imply that it is highly problematic that there is any moderately realistic basis for the formation of a non-trivial consensus around legitimate social arrangements. Crudely, stakeholders with certain reasons, from the diverse pool of such reasons, have grounds to endorse or prefer one kind of institutional arrangement for social order, while other people with different reasons have grounds to endorse or prefer a different, indeed in some cases incompatible kind of institutional arrangement. There is, putting it more sharply, no one substantive proposal about legitimate social arrangements that can command the reasonable endorsement of all relevant stakeholders. And accordingly, how legitimate social order is to be constituted remains to be established. So we want to get stakeholders on board. Stakeholders are different enough so that it's difficult to get all of them on board to anything of substance. We don't want to idealize away from that because then we lose touch with both them and with the practicalities of normative theorizing. So what are we going to do? As various commentators have noted, this conclusion, however reluctantly drawn, marks the degeneration, in my teacher Imre Lakatosh's terminology, of the research program originated by John Rawls with the publication of his intellectual blockbuster, A Theory of Justice. As Jerry Gauss recently put it, one has to be a especially devout disciple of Rawls not to conclude that his theory of justice was in disarray. There are, of course, a variety of responses to this difficulty. Indeed, this is characteristic of those periods in the histories of disciplines where practitioners do not any longer have telling grounds to recognize as binding or directive for their conduct a particular theoretical framework or paradigm, which can organize their activities and coordinate their individual contributions to theoretical development. As Thomas Kuhn put it, at such interparadigmatic periods, more and more attention is devoted to the difficulties by more and more of the field's most eminent practitioners. And for a time anyway, numerous partial solutions are offered for these difficulties. So this is his way of characterizing the interparadigmatic periods in the histories of the disciplines. And it applies, it appears to me, and I think appeared to Jerry, that this is a period that we had now entered in relation to Anglophone political philosophy and the Rawlsian tradition. Anyway, new diversity theory is one partial solution, and we'll see in a bit why it's just a partial solution. Okay, now I go somewhere else, find some other piece of paper. Here we are. I went before kind of giving some specifics about new diversity theory. I want to talk kind of at a different level about the design philosophy that sits behind the development of new diversity theory. So these are not premises or axioms in the theoretical development. These are things that the people working on these theories use as kind of guiding principles for model building in the social and political sciences. So new diversity theory takes as a kind of a background assumption that we're not going to be normalizing the diversity away, which is, of course, what Rawls does with the device of the veil of ignorance, which reduces the diversity, which he himself acknowledges even in a theory of justice, the diversity of the different conceptions of the good, which reduces that to a kind of singleton representative agent who decides for all. So that's a kind of a normalizing move. It's a very common move in all kinds of theorizing. It makes things infinitely simpler if you're dealing with one representative agent. Apparently, it's a part of some macroeconomic theories to reason in such ways. I don't know that for a fact. I've just read it. And anyway, we're not going to do that. That's off the cards. Okay, we're new diversity theorists are not going to normalize away. Okay. We're not idealizing either. So we're not saying of the individual agents, now there's a plurality of them. They have all kinds of different conceptions of the good, and I'll come to that in a moment. But we're not going to idealize them. We're not going to say, oh, they're perfectly rational and they know all the relevant facts and they reason instantaneously to the conclusion that this is what follows from my facts and values. And we're not going to do any of that. That was part of neoclassical macroeconomic theory until Herbert Simon came along and said, well, I don't think so, guys. It's already implicit in what I've said that it's interdisciplinary. So we're borrowing some of these ideas from different disciplines. It's not just all, and Rawls did too, of course. Rawls borrowed a lot of his ideas from economics and from political science, from the history of philosophy. So it's interdisciplinary. We're going to look around, see if we can find tools here, there, everywhere. Social choice theory, behavioral economics, those are management science. That's been a big one in my own contributions to new diversity theory, such as they are. So social evolution theory, cognitive psychology, going to look all around to try to find out as much as we can about the kind of phenomena that are the target. And of course, Jerry was a great recuperative philosopher. He wanted to recuperate the reputations of people who had been ignored because of the hegemony of Rawlsian theorizing. And in his last works, he was recuperating Hayek. You wouldn't think Hayek had to be recuperated, but he did. So we're bringing back Hayek and Simon and Berlin into the mainstream of thinking about political philosophy. Another thing is that we have a kind of an institutional orientation, that we're trying to think about what the institutions are that constitute social order for mutual benefit. It's just an abstract phrase, and you can say it as much as you want, but it doesn't actually produce social order to mutual benefit. Things that do that are conventions, and institutions, and processes that occur within those institutions, the relations of institutions to each other, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're going to take a look at. And ultimately, it's reductively naturalistic. There's no realm of facts independent of human history about the good and the right. And we're just going to have to figure that out for ourselves. So those are some of the things. I'm going to talk a little bit about this is really a descriptive thing. So I haven't got a lot of arguments. I'm not trying to convince you that new diversity theory is the best theory. Can I write on this bottom part of the board?
I think so, yeah.
And I would have to have a device that was adapted to that particular purpose, of which there are none.
Question.
That's okay. That's okay. This isn't. Oh, there's a blackboard. How cool is this?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And I have and there's chalk.
And there is chalk, but there is
No, it's all good. It's all good. I don't really need a lot of space. Okay. As long as you can read small print. So I'm going to talk about the sources of diversity. I want to talk about the fruits of diversity. I want to talk about sustaining diversity. I want to talk about managing diversity. And I want to talk about challenges to the new diversity theory. So that's the way I'm going to organize my remarks. And you can interrupt me at any point if I'm kind of, oh, by the way, I have to go and rehearse a scene from a play, and I have to be across the campus at 4 o'clock. So that'll be kind of a limit on how long I can be subjected to your quizzing. So what are people are different. Okay, so let's start with the base facts. Okay, people are different. They value different things. They trade off values that they share in different ways. They interpret the standards and values and concepts that they use to reason about the world in different ways, even when they seem to share them. So what are the sources of diversity? Well, Rawls actually has a really good description of what they are under the heading of the burdens of judgment in the book Political Liberalism. And it borrows from some earlier ideas, but it includes a bunch of other ideas that are also relevant. And so let me just see, I have to go and find my script again so that I can read them off without just making a mess of the list, because it's a pretty cool little list. And it includes a lot of things that are really familiar to us from everyday life, but that actually pose a kind of a problem when it comes to getting to people to agree about things. So these are the burdens of judgment according to Rawls. The vagueness of the concepts that we apply to relatively more concrete factors in order to make judgments or reach decisions, with the potential that different individuals will interpret these concepts differently and hence arrive at different judgments about the same situation. So Rawls had already talked about this under the concept-conception distinction that he borrowed from H.L.A. Hart in the Theory of Justice book. But he brings it right out to the front and shows that it's a real issue. You and I could have the same conceptual, this happens all the time in the classroom, I'm assuming, okay? I could have the same conceptual set, but you're kind of interpreting it through the filter of your own total experience. That's another one of the burdens of judgment. Okay, so we each have different total experiences, and you're interpreting it perhaps you're interpreting it in the light of your role responsibilities. Maybe you have a particular position that you occupy in an institution or in a family or whatever. And so you're interpreting that concept through those kind of that interpretive machinery. And somebody who has a different set of total worldview, role responsibilities, and so on might interpret the same concept in an entirely different way, and hence reach a different conclusion about some matter that's of importance between you or among you. Okay, so that's one. The difficulties of assessing the evidence. Okay, so again, that's, just absolutely everyday kind of thing. Look at the evidence. One person thinks that, oh, it's not quite settled yet, so I'm not quite sure. Another person thinks, oh, it's enough, for me. So this is, again, it's an issue that's come up recently in relation to the so-called replicability crisis in science. Scientists can't replicate each other's experiments because they're setting their probability values too low or too high, or and different people have different idea of how much evidence you'd have to have in order for you to say with confidence and to inspire the confidence of others that X. Okay, so people differ about that. Okay, now these may all seem like things that you can make vanish away by the idealization. Oh, they wouldn't do that if they were all perfectly well informed and reasoned perfectly and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but remember, we've already tied our hands on that. Okay, we've said we can't do that. Okay, for both ethical reasons and practical reasons. Okay, we can't do that. There's a deeper reason why we can't do that. Okay, but I won't try to sell you that right today. There's a variety of evaluative considerations that always come into play, particularly if you're trying to decide what to do, because what to do isn't just a matter of what the facts are, it's a matter of what you want to pursue, okay? And different people want to pursue different things, and different people interpret the things that they want to pursue in different ways. Our values are just as vague, if not vaguer, than our empirical beliefs. Or some of the concepts that we use to organize them. So again, there's all this room for people to perfectly legitimately arrive at different conclusions about how much value is to be obtained of this particular kind and this particular choice that I'm about to make or I'm considering. I've already mentioned the different total experiences that every individual brings to any of these considerations, and that's going to influence how they make all those decisions about how to refine the concept so that it's actually action guiding rather than just vague and abstract, how to refine the values so that, again, it can play a role in guiding action rather than just sitting there being a kind of a nice thing to admire. So people are going to do that in accordance with their total worldview. This is the one that's kind of tied to the earlier stuff from Isaiah Berlin and W.B. Galey from the 1950s. Insufficiently appreciated in my view. It's been one of my life's works to get this stuff back on the agenda. That in any choice situation, there's a range of values that we're trying to consider and balance in some way. It's not just one thing. It's very rarely one thing. So just think about any consumer choice, okay? It's, of course, you're choosing between this thing and that thing, but the standards that you're using to appraise those two things are multiple, okay? There's not just one reason to buy this car rather than that car. Maybe it's cheaper, but that's not the only thing. It's ugly, okay? It has bad fuel efficiency. It has a bad, safety record or whatever. I've already got 4 or 5 things and I haven't even put my thinking cap on, okay? So, and they don't necessarily all line up, okay? So the cheapest one isn't necessarily the safest one with the lowest miles per gallon and the best, resale value and so on and so forth. They don't all line up. So you have to figure out how to balance those competing standards that are implicated in every choice that you make, pretty much, of any kind of interest whatsoever. You have to figure out how to do that. And there's no voice from the sky that tells you this is the way you do it, okay? This standard gets 40% of the weight, that standard gets 20% of the weight, this other standard gets 15% of the weight. Those are things that, again, reflect your total experience, reflect your personality, reflect your degree of risk aversion, reflect all kinds of personality differences. And again, you can imagine them away if you like, but it's getting crazier and crazier to imagine these things away by saying, oh, well, if you're perfectly well informed, then it would be perfectly clear how you would balance these things. Well, it wouldn't, okay? And then well, yeah, I've just said it, the differences in weighing up these various factors, those are going to be, and it's what makes this, it's part of what makes this different, is that we each weigh these things up differently. That's why there are a variety of different cars to buy, because not everybody wants the same car. Not everybody reaches the same conclusion about how you balance those things. So that's pluralism. That's pluralism, and it's creates the problem in a way, okay, is that we now know that just empirically, okay, I'm just talking empirically so far, okay, we now know that there are all these sources of diversity among us in terms of the judgments that we form, in terms of the beliefs that we're likely to form given the same stimuli, in terms of the decisions that we're likely to make in relation to those beliefs and values. There's all this diversity, and it's just, Rawls actually says somewhere that it's part of the what you get when you have a democratic society, and that seems right to me. I might just put in a little ad for the university that I attended as an undergraduate, where I met a guy who was then retired called Sterling Lamprecht. Sterling Lamprecht wrote 2 articles in the Journal of Philosophy. It was called the Journal of Philosophy and Psychology when he published the first of the articles in 1921 and 1922, in which he laid all of this out. Utterly ignored by all subsequent scholarship. Utterly ignored. They didn't found the journal called The Pluralist. They founded a journal called The Monist, okay? Utterly ignored. Not even repudiated. So, but he was somebody I met when I was an undergraduate. So I've been making it sound like diversity is a big problem, and in a certain kind of framework, and that's the way I set it up. So that's why it's sounding like that. In a certain kind of framework, it is a problem. If people are legitimately, and I haven't established the legitimate part yet, okay, but if people are legitimately diverse in all these ways, then how are you going to get them to agree on some substantive propositions about how to organize society for in an orderly way and for mutual benefit? How are you going to do that? And that's why Rawls drags the veil of ignorance in, because all the diversity just disappears. Okay, just all disappears. And so how are you going to do it? Come to that. But first, why would you want to do it? Because there are all these fruits of diversity. What are they? Okay. Well, one of them is, borrowing a phrase from psychology, is the assembly bonus. Everybody in this room knows things, and indeed knows things about this topic that I don't know, okay? And it might be that the key to the next step in the progress of new diversity theory is in the heads of one of you, okay? And because you're different from me, okay? My head doesn't contain it all, okay? You're different from me, so in your head, there are things about this topic that might be relevant to making advances in its development, okay? And that's called an assembly bonus. Now, right now, it's what psychologists also call a hidden profile, because I don't know what's in your head. It's hidden, okay? There might be something in your head, but there might not, okay? And I don't know until, and so one of the things, this is one of the reasons why talking is so important and listening is so important, is that if I can get you to express it, then I end up knowing it. Okay, and it might change my mind about what I have. It might be enough to switch my thinking from, I'll do this to, I'll do that instead. So that's what psychologists call the assembly bonus. And sometimes when we get the assembly bonus, we find ourselves agreeing on things, because we now have what another philosopher calls a pool of reasons that's different from the pool of reasons that we had before. We have a shared pool of reasons. I now know what's in your head. You now know what's in my head. We now know what's in each other's head. So we have a bigger pool of reasons, and that might give us enough of a basis to end up agreeing about some matter that we had previously been divided about. But even when it doesn't, okay, there's still a benefit, because now I know things that maybe they didn't change my mind, but now I know things that I didn't know before. And maybe they'll turn out to be important later or elsewhere. And you know things too. Okay, so that's the pool of reasons argument. One of my favorites is stress testing. And this is so great. I love psychology so much, so much. So they have a really good phrase making. I don't know whether they employ somebody to do this or whether they just are better at this. Why should they be better at it? Okay, they're all kind of stats nerds. Why should they be better at it? Okay. Expectancy disconfirmation. That's my phrase of the day. I deed it to you with love. Okay. What does it mean? It means that if somebody says something that you're not expecting them to say, it makes you, or has a tendency to make you think again about what you had originally been thinking about that topic. Okay. Now, it doesn't happen all the time. I'm sure there are personality differences, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes somebody will say something and you'll say, oh my God, I didn't expect her to say that. This casts into, puts stress on my firm conviction that X, Y, Z. Okay. And so, and you do see this happen in your life. If it hasn't happened in your life, you're not hanging around with the right people. Okay. But it does happen. Okay. And when it happens, it's a little moment where you've now got a piece of information you didn't have before. And not only does it give you another piece of information, it casts some kind of doubt on what you've been thinking before. So if you think about it in terms of science, it's we predict that we're going to observe something and we don't. Our expectancy is disconfirmed. And now we say, oh, now we have to look and try to figure out why the prediction didn't come out the way we thought it was going to come out. And that leads to a whole exploration. Was the observation actually accurate in the first place? There's the famous Duhem-Quine problem. How do we trace it back to its actual source? It's not necessarily just confirming of the theory. It might be one of the auxiliary theories, the observational theories and whatnot. So that's stress testing. My actual favorite, though, is distributing risk. So if you and I are different, okay, and we have the right kind of playing field, and I'll come to describe that in a minute. If we have the right kind of playing field, then you can say, I think this is the better way to do this. And I can say, nah, yeah, I'm going to go and do it some different way. And what we just did was we created an opportunity for us both to learn something that we couldn't learn unless we both did these different things. Okay. Contrast it with, we have a talk, kind of, you kind of browbeat me, or your force of argument is much better. I say, okay, let's both do this thing. Well, what we find out if we both do this thing is what happens if you do that thing. Okay. We never find out what happens if you do something different. Okay. So there's a posterior set of facts that we never get access to. Okay. Because we didn't do that thing. Okay. And sometimes that's the only way to find out what happens if you do that thing, is to actually do it. Again, you're familiar with this. It happens all the time. Okay. You didn't go to the football game and there was this wonderful try at the end. What would you have felt like? You don't know because you didn't go. Okay. So what has this got to do with risk distribution? Before we know what the right way to go is, it's better to have people going both of the possible ways, or all n of the possible ways, because then they each learn something about what's further down the trail, about what happens when you go that way, that they would not learn otherwise. If everybody said, okay, we're all, well, follow the leader, boom, boom, boom. You find out what happens if you go that way, but you don't find out about any of those other paths. Okay. And so Kuhn describes this. Okay. So another person who's severely neglected by political philosophy is Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science. And this is his risk spreading argument, that one of the values of this diversity among the scientific community is that they explore the various paths forward in a particular scientific domain because they differ about how to progress. And they learn something more and better and different than they could have if they had all said, okay, this is the dominant idea, so let's all just do that. Okay, so there's so diversity is good. Diversity makes us kind of more confident in what we think because we've exposed it to alternative ideas from other people. It gives us a bigger pool of reasons than we would otherwise have because we don't all have everything in our own little heads. Okay. It shapes us up when we've been complacent and thinking about things in a certain kind of way, and somebody that we respect and honor says something that contradicts that, and then we have to rethink it. Okay. We don't necessarily come to agree with them, but we have to rethink it. And that intellectual work is valuable in itself, and it spreads risk. So if we're each doing something different, then we're going to learn more about the total field of activity than we would have if we'd each done the same thing. So what the fruits of diversity suggest to those people pursuing the NDT, the new diversity theory, is that as tempting as it would be to get out of this problem that's created by those three axioms, right? By just idealizing or normalizing or making the diversity vanish, we would lose something if we did that, okay? Not only wouldn't we be honest about the empirical reality, not only would we disrespect the stakeholders who have these diversities of beliefs and values, but we actually would forego the opportunity to spread risk, to those other things, okay? We would lose those opportunities, okay? So we're tempted to say, well, what would happen if we didn't have to do that? If we could somehow resolve this, this dilemma or trilemma or whatever it is, we could somehow resolve that without having to give up on the diversity. And so now we come to the institutional side and the recuperative side. And I think one of the most interesting things about the new diversity theory is that it helps reframe our understanding of certain things that have already happened, been well established, widely known in the social and political philosophy communities, but are often not, because, in some cases, because they're branded with, kind of uncongenial brands. And I'm going to say the H word soon. So please, if anybody is going to be triggered by the mention of Friedrich von H, please leave the room now or put your rubber earplugs in, okay? So we're going to recuperate some theories and ideas that are now going to be put in a different kind of light. So let me just start with, because I've already mentioned Hayek. Okay, so Hayek's on the nose in liberal or progressive political philosophical circles, and I don't have an interesting opinion about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But one of the things that distinguishes him from a lot of others of his ilk is he has a particular sort of story about exchange in the market. Okay, and his story is that exchange can occur without people agreeing about very much. That I don't have to agree with you about what makes this thing valuable for it to make sense to both of us, for me to buy it from you. We don't have to agree about anything, not even that, okay? We certainly don't have to agree about politics or about which football team it's more fruitful to follow, what our favorite colors are. We don't have to know any of those things about each other. It can be a completely abstract interaction that comes down to, do I think that this is worth more or less than the price that you are asking? Do you think that your price is more or less than I'm willing to pay? That's all we have to know about each other. And so all those differences that are still there, okay, they didn't disappear. In fact, they're necessary for the transaction to occur, okay? You and I have to have different opinions about the trade-off between the money and the object, actually, for the trade occur, okay? So they don't disappear, but they're completely irrelevant. And so exchange as a fundamental organizing principle of social relations is diversity independent. It's independent of all these issues about diversity, okay? That's the story, okay? And that's its great virtue, okay? I'm not saying we should be Hayekians in all things. I'm just saying that's its great virtue, is that it reduces the amount of agreement there has to be between us in order for a mutually beneficial social transaction of a repeatable kind that scales up very easily, okay, to occur in society that could become a fundamental organizing principle for a lot of social relations. So Now, exchange actually depends on something that's, in some ways analytically anterior to it, which is an idea that I found myself calling and then discovered that somebody else had already given it this name, jurisdictional rights. Okay, so I have jurisdictional rights according to, say, a particular system of laws. If it's entirely up to me what I do in relation to X. And I don't have to consider its effects on you, whether you think it's a good idea or not a good idea. Okay, so sometimes it's illustrated by, I have jurisdictional rights over what I think. Okay, or I have jurisdictional rights over my ultimate metaphysical presuppositions for existence and organizing it intellectually, or whatever. Okay, pick your favorite thing that you think that people have, should have, do have, under some legal system might have. An unencumbered right that doesn't involve me saying, oh, I can only exercise this if it doesn't piss somebody else off. That's not a jurisdictional right. Okay, that's not the deal. Okay, well, we have a lot of them actually, and they're built into a lot of liberal democratic political systems. And again, it takes all the pressure off. It doesn't matter that you have a different opinion about this than I do, because both of our opinions are protected. Okay, it doesn't matter that you would like to do one thing and I would like to do another thing in some situation, because subject to the context and whatnot, you can do your thing and I can do my thing. We don't have to do the same thing. And so again, you can see this is an organizing principle that you could apply in lots of different circumstances. Okay, it's kind of at the basis of both exchange and contract more generally. Okay, it sits underneath both of those things more generally. And you can see how that could be a pretty useful organizing tool. Again, I'm not, saying that's the only thing that goes on. It's the only thing of interest, but you can see how it'd be an interesting organizing tool that doesn't efface the diversity. It doesn't say, well, first you have to resolve the diversity and then you can have your jurisdictional rights to say whatever you want, except that it'll be the same thing as everybody else is saying. Okay, that's not what a jurisdictional. Now, Jerry was very big towards the end of his life on these jurisdictional rights, because he thought that they were sort of, it's kind of an Irving Goffman idea, that they gave you this kind of inner citadel within which you construct yourself. Okay, and that he also thought that moral innovation depended very strongly on there being jurisdictional rights, that having a kind of a wacky idea that was trying to kind of really crazy in relation to traditional or customary morality was more likely if you had this kind of freedom of thought, let's say, that was protected by some kind of jurisdictional right. Another manifestation of this milking the diversity and without effacing it or normalizing it away is all the different ways in which we recognize the value of different perspectives. Let me just illustrate this with kind of an imaginary, this is probably not utterly, kind of simplified, counterfactual even, but what happens in a cabinet system of government? Okay, so I'm the Minister for Defense, and so I put on defense classes. Okay, and you're the Minister of Health, and you put on health classes. Okay, and you're the Minister of Finance, and you put on finance classes, and then we all see some situation in a different way. Okay, we see different things about it. Okay, we see different values are in play for each of us. How much is it going to cost? Will it really deter the Chinese? Will our soldiers get sick as a result of this? So there are all kinds of different things that you see by putting those glasses on. And ultimately, that diversity is very valuable for good decision-making at the highest level. Okay? Because you don't, and a lot of people think that maybe at some point that's what went wrong with the COVID management, is that not enough of the different classes were in play. I don't have any factual information that bears on this, not expressing an opinion, but that's been said, okay, is that they let the health officers run this, and there was also all this economic stuff going on, and also blah, blah, blah going on, okay? And so the claim is that they didn't have enough different kinds of glasses on this situation, okay? So that's and again, the departmental system doesn't say to the and this is where I'm really making it up, okay? That if it was really a departmental system, a really serious departmental system, it would say to the defense guys, don't you care about health at all? Okay, the health department will look at this and they'll put the glasses on it. Okay, you just think about it purely from the point of view of defense. Okay, readiness or preparedness or whatever it is. Okay, that's your job. Okay, is to see it in that one way. Okay, and so that's an example of a situation, if it should be even moderately realistic, where we're using the diversity for mutual benefit. We have a bigger pool of reasons when it comes to the cabinet table. Maybe some reasons emerge as decisive for some reason or another. And in any event, all of our stuff gets put under stress by the different perspectives that are used. Cool, cool, cool. One of the worries about what I've been talking about is that it leads to minimal stateism. If all you can say, and all I've said so far is contracts are good, exchange is good, jurisdictional rights are really important. So how do we, is there any way of justifying something more than the anarchy, you know, the minimal state, no Zickian thing? If that's what it's got, okay, plus, you know, a little bit of enforcement. There has to be enforcement, of course, okay, because people have motivations in their real life. And remember, we're trying to be realistic about this. People have motivations to violate conventions about contractual relationships. So we have to have enforcement, but we don't need anything more than enforcement. And then we just let the market take care of itself, okay? So I'm not one of those guys, you know, in my own personal politics, okay? The market just takes care of itself. I don't have a kind of a zippy answer to how you add the other stuff in that I would like to see added in, okay? I mean, I have a kind of an answer, but I don't have a zippy answer, so I'm not going to attempt one today. But that's for me the tension that still exists in the new diversity theory literature, that you can get as far as contracts are good, jurisdictional rights are good, exchange is good as an example of, you know, both of them in effect, and that they're all good because they're diversity sustaining. They don't require normalization. They don't require idealization, because remember, we're not, this is the great Hayek thing is we're not saying that market relations are efficient, okay? That's Hayek's point. You don't even know how to say market relations are efficient. That's his real point, okay? And we're not saying that. We're just saying that they don't ask you to believe things you don't believe, to value things you don't value, and that's why they're important politically. So I don't know how you get there, and it'd be interesting to pursue that. And I think that's, you know, that's the way forward. It'll be an institutional way, you know, because that's what we're interested in the new diversity theory is institutions. And I think it'll actually come down to no, I'm not gonna say that. If I said it, I'd run out of things that were even mildly plausible to say about it. So I won't say it at all. One of the things that that's crucial, and it's made especially crucial in our current circumstances, is whether there's such a thing as too much diversity or toxic diversity. And I guess empirically, you'd have to say yes. So a lot of public discourse is now being driven by what Cass Sunstein called polarization entrepreneurs, people whose job it is to polarize, who make money by polarizing the community, okay, using social media tools and using the kind of the particular algorithmic arrangements that, you know, drive what you see and what you encounter on the social media. So if there's a lot of that, then the diversity becomes kind of a challenge, even in relation to jurisdictional rights, because people start having what economists call tuistic preferences. I have preferences about what your preferences should be. Okay. So people start having them, and enough people start having them so that it becomes a problem. Okay. So there's that. There's also that there's no longer a toleration of different views, even if, I mean, I was trying to build a case that we should really be kind of welcoming diversity because of all of its benefits. It helps us distribute risk. It gives us a bigger pool of reasons. It helps us unearth things we never would have thought of ourselves, blah, blah, blah. But that requires a certain toleration of people's opinions and values when they're different from our own. But it's the job of the polarization entrepreneur to make us intolerant. And indeed, that's what we can witness, that the levels of intolerance are increasing. And so even the contract, I won't sell you a cake because you want it for your gay wedding, even the contract and the exchange and the jurisdictional rights are under threat from polarization, from intolerance, and so on. Now, of course, these things aren't new. I mean, at least intolerances. I don't know whether we've really had kind of algorithmically driven polarization. And that's an important point. Herbert Simon, among the more less well-known things that he said that frequency and intensity make a lot of difference. And here's my analogy that is from my childhood. So people have been putting shit into river courses for hundreds, if not thousands of years, okay? But by the 1960s, they started putting enough shit into water courses in the United States so that a river outside of Cleveland, Ohio, burst into flame. There was too frequent, too intense pollution. The system was no longer self-flushing to the degree to which it had previously been, okay? And so there's a kind of a little curve that we're on where you're sort of saying, at some point, we're not going to be able to flush this stuff out of the system anymore because the frequency and intensity with which it's being produced overwhelms the flushing mechanisms that we have in society. And so that's the worry for the new diversity theory. Now, of course, we can make it all go away by saying, all those guys are crazy people. We don't have to take any care of them. We should just round them up, send them to Madagascar or wherever and be done with them. Okay. But remember, we're not normalizing. We're trying to hang on to the three commitments that we accepted, which is that we weren't going to normalize, we weren't going to idealize, we were going to try to be respect the stakeholders and in their diversity. But there's a kind of a limit to how far we can take that. That's determined by things that are really just empirical, and it's like a number. At some point, it's happening too frequently, it's happening too intensively, and the system won't flush anymore. And the diversity ceases to have the value that it has. Even that diversity which remains ceases to have the value it has because its value depends on tolerance, and tolerance has disappeared. And on that happy note, now notice that I'm wearing my Ubu t-shirt. Some of you will know who Ubu is and some of you won't. And you should be consulting your phones right now to find out. His name is spelled U-B-U. U-B-U-B-U. No, I can't do it. I'm not Frank Sinatra. Thank you very much. You've been very kind. And thanks for listening. And it's over to you. Now it's my turn to listen. Oh, you usually take a break, don't you? Is that what you usually do?
We go straight to question time.
Straight to
It's up
question.
to you. I mean, whatever you feel more comfortable with. So I'm just going to stop the recording though.
But this might be the most fun part.
Yeah. Do you want, I mean, we can record it, but.
Oh, I
people
see. It
are-
requires carrying the mic around. No, no. it's
It,
too much
it-
of a
it just
pain.
depends on whether everyone is okay.
What do
with
you
it.
usually do? I don't know.
Or if you prefer that I stop, no? Margaret says stop it.
Stop it.
All right, so